I'm Mason, 42 years old, and at my own father's funeral, my parents decided to call my 13-year-old son a charity case right in front of the open casket. Before I tell you how I ended up signing the papers to put them in the cheapest state-run facility I could find, leaving them stunned in a parking lot, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. The scent of lilies and floor wax is something you never really forget. It sticks to the back of your throat. We were at the Eternal Rest Funeral Home, the most expensive one in the city, naturally. My father, Robert, wouldn't have it any other way. Even though it was his father, my grandfather Joseph, lying in that mahogany casket, Robert treated the event less like a goodbye and more like a networking opportunity. I stood near the back, fixing the collar of my son, Caleb's suit. It was a bit big on him. We'd bought it off the rack at a department store because, honestly, things had been tight. Not because I didn't make money. I'm a senior architect. But because every spare dime I made went into a black hole that I called family obligations. Caleb looked uncomfortable. He's a quiet kid, always has been. He has dyslexia, and school is a war zone for him. But give that boy a wrench or a circuit board, and he's a magician. He loved Grandpa Joseph. They spent hours in the garage together. Caleb was the only one crying real tears today. My brother Andrew walked in then. He made sure the keys to his rental Mercedes S-Class jangled loudly enough for everyone to hear as he dropped them into his pocket. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. Next to him was his wife, Victoria, looking like she was walking a red carpet, and their son, Connor, the golden grandchild. Connor is 16. He smirked at Caleb, looking him up and down with that specific brand of teenage cruelty that cuts deep. "Nice suit, Caleb," Connor whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Did they sell it by the pound?" Caleb shrank into himself. I put a hand on my son's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Ignore him," I murmured. But then my parents made their entrance. Robert and Catherine. They walked arm in arm, looking devastated, but I knew my father was checking to see who was watching. They approached the casket. I moved up with Caleb to pay our respects. That's when it happened. My father leaned over the casket, ostensibly to say a prayer. But his eyes darted to Caleb, who was wiping his eyes with a tissue. Robert leaned toward my mother, shielding his mouth with his hand, but he didn't whisper quietly enough. Or maybe he wanted me to hear. "Look at him," Robert hissed, adjusting that cheap tie. "It's embarrassing, Catherine. The boy looks like a charity case who wandered in off the street. Thank God we have Connor. At least one branch of this family isn't a total failure." My mother, Catherine, sighed, a sound of long-suffering martyrdom. "I know, Bob. It's a shame Joseph has to be seen with that, even in death. Mason really should have tried harder." Time seemed to slow down. The blood rushing in my ears sounded like a freight train. A charity case. A failure. My son. The boy who had spent the last 3 nights holding my hand because he missed his great-grandfather so much. The boy who had fixed Robert's toaster last Thanksgiving only to be told he probably broke it further before it worked perfectly. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. Not yet. I just felt something inside me snap. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock disengaging. The lock that had kept my mouth shut for 40 years. The service proceeded. I sat there, stone-faced. Caleb sat close to me, his knee bouncing nervously. After the eulogies, which were mostly about how successful the family name was, thanks to Robert, my father stood up to make an announcement. This wasn't on the program. "Friends, family," Robert's voice boomed. He loved the sound of it. "In honor of my father, Joseph, Catherine and I have decided to secure the future of his legacy. We have a savings fund, roughly $350,000. A ripple went through the room. I frowned. $350,000? I managed their finances. I paid their bills. I knew for a fact their accounts were hovering near zero. Where did this come from? "We have decided," Robert continued, beaming at Andrew and his family, "that this inheritance will be designated for the grandchild who shows the most promise, the one who will carry our name to new heights. The money will go to Connor, for his first Porsche when he starts business school. Connor puffed up his chest, looking smugly at Caleb. Andrew clapped him on the back. Victoria actually clapped her hands together like a seal. As for the others, Robert glanced fleetingly at Caleb. We hope this serves as motivation to apply themselves. The disrespect was absolute. It wasn't about the money. It was the public erasure of my son. It was the lie. I stood up. Mason, sit down. Andrew hissed from across the aisle. I ignored him. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a contact saved, Wyatt. He was an old college buddy who managed the Silver Lake assisted living facility, the high-end place where I had been paying for my parents' independent living suite for the last decade. I dialed. I put it on speaker, but held it to my ear so only those close could hear the ringtone. But I wasn't talking to Wyatt yet. I was talking to the room. That's interesting, Dad, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The room went silent, because I was under the impression that I was the one paying for your housing, your food, and your country club membership for the last 10 years. Robert's face went red. This is neither the time nor the place. Actually, it's the perfect place, I interrupted, walking toward the aisle. You see, everyone here thinks you're a successful retired investor. But we both know the truth. We know who signed the checks when you went bankrupt in 2014. We know who paid for the hip replacement Mom needed. It wasn't Andrew. And it certainly wasn't from a $350,000 savings account that doesn't exist. You ungrateful brat, my mother shrieked, her poise shattering. After everything we did for you. Hello. Wyatt's voice came through the phone. Wyatt, it's Mason, I said loud and clear. Cancel the contract. The Platinum Suite. Immediate effect. Mason, are you sure? Wyatt asked. They'll be evicted by tonight. I'm sure, I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. Transfer the account to the default state option. You know the one. Shady Pines. Wyatt hesitated. The basic package? Mason, it's 4 to a room. No private bathroom. It's rough. Do it, I commanded. Send the transport van to the funeral home. Now. I hung up. You can't do that. Andrew stood up, his face purple. You can't put Mom and Dad in a dump like Shady Pines. Then you pay for Silver Lake, Andrew, I said, turning to my brother. Go ahead. Whip out that credit card. Oh wait, I know your credit score. You can't even finance that rental Mercedes outside. Andrew froze. Victoria looked at him, panic in her eyes. And as for the $350,000, I turned back to my parents, who were now clinging to each other, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. It's a fantasy, but here is a reality check. The house you currently live in, the one you just promised to Connor, I bought the deed 5 years ago to keep the bank from foreclosing. It's in Caleb's name. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Caleb, I said, turning to my son, what do you think? Should we let people who call you a failure live in your house? Caleb looked at his grandparents. He looked at Connor, who was no longer smirking. He looked at me. No, Dad, Caleb said softly. I don't think so. There you have it, I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Pack your bags, Mom and Dad. The shuttle for Shady Pines will be here in 20 minutes. I suggest you grab some of the free cookies in the lobby. I hear the food where you're going tastes like wet cardboard. My parents froze. The color drained from their faces, leaving them looking like the corpses in the room. And that was just the beginning. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. Not the awkward silence of an argument, but the heavy, decompressed silence that comes after a bomb goes off. Caleb sat in the passenger seat of my Ford truck. Reliable, paid off, unlike Andrew's flashy rental. He was fiddling with the vents, a nervous habit. Dad? He asked quietly as we pulled onto the highway. Yeah, Bud. Did you mean it? About the house? And Shady Pines? I gripped the steering wheel tight. My knuckles were white. I meant every word, Caleb. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. I'm sorry I let them talk to you like that for so long. "It's okay," he mumbled. "I'm used to it." That broke my heart more than the insult itself. He was used to it. He was used to being the charity case because I had been too busy trying to be the good son to protect him. 10 years. I let my mind drift back as the miles passed. 10 years ago, my father, Robert, had come to me in a panic. He sat at my kitchen table, crying, confessing that he had leveraged everything on a tech startup that turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. The house, the retirement fund, the savings. Gone. "Mason, you have to help us," he had begged. "If people find out, the shame will kill your mother. We have a reputation." I was 32 then. I had just made partner at my architecture firm. I had savings. I had plans. But they were my parents. So I stepped in. I bought their debt. I set up an allowance. I paid for the Silver Lake facility so they could pretend they were just downsizing for lifestyle reasons. I worked 16-hour days. I missed Caleb's soccer games. I missed holidays because I was picking up extra freelance drafting work. All to keep Robert and Catherine in a lifestyle they hadn't earned, just so they could look down on me and call me unambitious because I didn't drive a sports car like Andrew. Andrew, my brother, the sales executive who changed jobs every 6 months and lived entirely on credit. He contributed nothing. Zero. But because he showed up to Christmas in a leased BMW and told tall tales about big deals, he was the favorite. We pulled into the driveway of my modest duplex. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. It was safe. "Go get changed, bud," I said as we walked inside. "I'm going to make some grilled cheese." Caleb nodded but didn't go to his room. Instead, he went to the hallway closet and pulled out a battered wooden box. It smelled of cedar and old tobacco. It was Grandpa Joseph's. "Grandpa told me to open this after the funeral," Caleb said, placing it on the kitchen table. I stopped taking the bread out. "He did. Yeah, last week, when we were fixing the lawnmower," he said. "Caleb, when they put me in the ground, you open the box. Not before. And definitely not when your dad is looking the other way." I sat down opposite him. "Well, let's see what he left you." I expected maybe a pocket watch, maybe a few $100s in cash. Joseph was a simple man. He had been a mechanic, then owned a small chain of repair shops. He lived simply, unlike his son Robert. Caleb undid the brass latch. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. Instead, there were rolls of blueprints, old ones hand-drawn, and a thick leather-bound journal. Caleb unfolded the first blueprint. It was a design for a high-efficiency engine part. Detailed. Complex. "He drew these," Caleb whispered, running his finger over the lines. "He taught me how to read these." "There's something else," I said, pointing to a thick blue envelope taped to the inside of the lid. It had my name on it and Caleb's. "To Mason and Caleb. Open only when the vultures start circling." My stomach tightened. Grandpa Joseph knew. He always knew. Before I could reach for the envelope, a violent pounding shook our front door. "Mason, open this damn door right now." It was Andrew. I sighed, looking at Caleb. "Stay here. Don't open that envelope yet." I walked to the door and yanked it open. Andrew was standing there, his face flushed, his tie loosened. His rental Mercedes was parked crookedly in my driveway, blocking me in. "What do you want, Andrew?" "What do I want?" He pushed past me into the living room. "I want you to fix this. Mom and Dad are in a van. Mason, a transport van that smells like urine. They're taking them to the south side. That's where Shady Pines is," I said, closing the door calmly. "It fits their budget, which is zero. You have to pay for Silver Lake." Andrew screamed. "You can't do this to the family image. Victoria is humiliated. Her friends are going to find out. Then pay for it yourself," I repeated. "You're the successful one, right, Mr. Big Shot Salesman?" Andrew faltered. My assets are tied up right now. Liquidity issues. The market is volatile." "Bullshit," I said. "You're broke, Andrew. You've always been broke. You're driving a rental car to a funeral to impress people who don't care about you." "I am not broke," he yelled, but his voice cracked. And Dad said there's money. The $350,000. That was a lie, Andrew. Just like your career. I shouted back, finally letting some of the anger out. Dad made that up to hurt Caleb. To make Connor look good. There is no money. There is only debt. Debt that I bought so they wouldn't go to jail for fraud. Andrew stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Wait, he said, his voice dropping. Fraud. Dad cooked the books on his tech startup 10 years ago. Covered it up. I paid it off. I own them, Andrew. I own their debt, I own their house, and until today I own their dignity. But I'm done paying for it. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Calmer ring. I opened it to reveal Lincoln, Grandpa Joseph's attorney and old fishing buddy. He was holding a briefcase and looking grim. Lincoln, I said. Good to see you. Though the timing is complicated. Lincoln looked at Andrew, then at me. I imagine it is. But Joseph gave me strict instructions. If you pulled the plug on Robert, and word traveled fast to my office that a certain transport van was deployed, I was to come here immediately. Caleb walked out of the kitchen, clutching the blue envelope. Is it time? Caleb asked. Lincoln smiled at my son. A genuine, warm smile. Yes, son. It's time to talk about what Joseph really left behind. And Andrew. Lincoln turned his gaze to my brother, his eyes hardening. You might want to sit down. Or leave. Personally, I'd prefer you leave, but you're going to hear this eventually. I'm staying, Andrew said, crossing his arms defiantly. If there's an inheritance, Connor deserves his share. Connor, Lincoln said, testing the name like it tasted sour. Yes, we'll get to Connor. But first, we need to talk about the assets. I looked at the blue envelope in Caleb's hand. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with electricity. The secrets of a decade were about to come out, and I had a feeling that putting my parents in a nursing home was only the first domino to fall. While Lincoln was setting up his paperwork on my dining table, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Wyatt. Attachment. Photo.jpg text. The eagle has landed, or rather crashed. Good luck, man. I opened the photo. It was a grainy shot taken from the reception desk at Shady Pines. My father, Robert, was sitting in a plastic wheelchair. He didn't need one. He just loved the drama. Wearing his bespoke Italian funeral suit, surrounded by peeling beige wallpaper and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't been restocked since 1999. My mother was standing next to him, holding a designer handbag against her chest like a shield, looking at a nurse with sheer terror. I felt a twinge of guilt. Just a twinge. Then I remembered the words charity case, and the guilt evaporated like mist in a desert. Let me tell you about Shady Pines. It's not a torture chamber, but for people like Robert and Catherine Lawson, it might as well be. It's a state-subsidized facility. It smells permanently of boiled cabbage and industrial-strength antiseptic. The lights are fluorescent and hum constantly. The staff are overworked and underpaid, which means they have zero patience for entitlement. I imagined the check-in process. Name? The receptionist would ask, popping gum. Robert Lawson. My father would boom. I demand to see the manager. There has been a mistake. We are supposed to be at Silver Lake. No mistake, honey, the nurse would say, looking at the clipboard. Transfer order signed by Mason Lawson. Payment plan, basic. That means room 304. It's a shared quad. You're bunking with Mr. Henderson. He yells in his sleep, so bring earplugs. A shared room. My father hadn't shared a room since college. The humiliation would be physical for him. Back in my living room, the atmosphere was tense. Andrew was pacing. Lincoln opened his briefcase. Joseph was a smart man, Lincoln began, adjusting his glasses. He knew his son, your father, was a financial illiterate with a God complex. He also knew you, Mason, were too loyal for your own good. Get to the money, Andrew snapped. The money, Lincoln said, looking over his spectacles, is gone. Robert spent his portion years ago. However, Joseph was a saver and a brilliant investor in patents, specifically mechanical patents. Caleb perked up. Patents. That box you have, Caleb? Lincoln pointed. Those aren't just drawings. Those are the original designs for a fuel injection system Joseph licensed to a major automotive manufacturer in 2005. The royalties have been accumulating in a blind trust. Andrew's eyes lit up. How much? It's substantial, Lincoln said. But Robert doesn't have access to it. Neither do you, Andrew. And neither does Mason, technically. Who then? Andrew demanded. Caleb, Lincoln said. It's a generation-skipping trust. Joseph set it up the day Caleb was diagnosed with dyslexia. He told me, if the world is going to make it hard for that boy to read, I'm going to make sure he can afford to write his own ticket. I looked at Caleb. He looked stunned. But here is the kicker, Lincoln continued. The trust has a clause. It covers the health and housing of Joseph's descendants, provided the trustee Mason deems it necessary. But it strictly forbids usage for vanity expenses. And it gives the trustee absolute power to determine where the beneficiaries live if they cannot support themselves. I started to laugh. A dry, humorless laugh. Grandpa Joseph had paved the way for exactly what I had done today. He had weaponized his legacy to protect the only people who actually loved him. This is insane, Andrew muttered. I'm contesting this. I'll sue. Elder abuse. That's what this is. You threw Mom and Dad into a dungeon. Go ahead and sue, I said comfortably. But lawyers cost money, Andrew. Do you have any? Andrew pulled out his phone. I'm calling Victoria. We're going to get Mom and Dad out of there. We'll bring them to our house. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, you have a spare room? I thought you turned the guest room into Victoria's yoga studio? Andrew glared at me and walked out to the porch to make the call. Through the window, I watched him arguing. I saw him waving his arms. Then he stopped. He slumped. He hung up and walked back in, looking defeated. Victoria says, "It's not a good time," Andrew mumbled, looking at the floor. She says with Connor's situation and her migraines, we can't have old people in the house. Imagine that, I said. So they stay at Shady Pines. Or you pay. I can't pay. Andrew exploded. Okay? I can't pay. I'm maxed out. The cards, the lease, the tuition for Connor's private school. I'm drowning, Mason. There it was. The crack in the golden veneer. And Connor, Lincoln interjected softly. You mentioned his tuition. I believe the school called my office yesterday. Joseph was listed as an emergency contact. Why would they call you? Andrew asked, defensive. Because tuition is 3 months overdue, Lincoln said. And there was an incident. A theft. Theft? I asked. A gold Rolex, Lincoln said. Missing from the locker room. Belonging to a donor's son. They found it in Connor's backpack. Andrew's face went white. That's a lie. Connor is a good kid. He's the golden boy. He's going to Stanford. He's going to juvenile detention if the school presses charges, Lincoln said. They held off out of respect for Joseph's passing. But that grace period ends Monday. I looked at my brother. The arrogance was stripping away layer by layer. His parents were in a pauper's home. His finances were a lie. His son was a thief. Why? Andrew whispered. Why did he do it? Gambling, Lincoln said. Online sports betting. Apparently, the Golden Child has a $50,000 debt to some very unfriendly bookies. Caleb gasped. 50,000? I sat back processing this. My parents had pinned all their hopes, all their pride, on Connor. They had insulted Caleb to elevate Connor. And Connor was crumbling under the pressure of being perfect, turning to crime to maintain the illusion of wealth his father and grandfather had taught him to value above all else. I have to go, Andrew said, grabbing his keys. I have to find him. He's not at home, Lincoln said. He's at the precinct. They picked him up an hour ago. He tried to pawn a diamond ring. Your mother's ring, Andrew. Victoria's wedding ring. Andrew looked like he was going to be sick. He didn't say another word. He just turned and ran out the door. We heard the Mercedes engine roar to life, a sound of expensive desperation, and speed away. I looked at Caleb. He was holding the blue envelope, looking terrified. Is that what happens when you have too much money? Caleb asked. That's what happens when you love money more than people, I told him. Open the envelope, Caleb. Let's see what the man who actually loved you wanted you to know. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he tore the seal of the blue envelope. It wasn't just paper inside. There was a thick stack of documents, paper clipped together, and a smaller, sealed note addressed to me. Caleb handed me the note. Read this first, Mason. I unfolded the stationery. Grandpa Joseph's handwriting was shaky but legible. Mason, if you are reading this, Robert has finally pushed you too far. I know you, son. You have a heart as big as a barn, and your father has been filling it with hay and setting it on fire for years. You think you bought Robert's debt 10 years ago? You think you saved him? Look at the papers in Caleb's hand. I looked at the stack Caleb was holding. Let me see those, bud. I flipped through them. My eyes widened. These weren't just random papers. They were promissory notes, legal assignments of debt. I saw my signature on the loan consolidation from 2014, but stapled to it was a transfer of ownership. Joseph bought the debt, I whispered. He bought the debt from the bank before I did. I read further. When I had paid off the bank to save my parents, the bank had actually transferred the rights to Joseph as a silent guarantor. I hadn't paid the bank. I had unknowingly paid Joseph's shell company, and Joseph had put that money right back into the trust for Caleb. I don't understand, I said to Lincoln. Joseph didn't want Robert to know he was the one holding the leash, Lincoln explained. And he didn't want you to lose your savings. So, every check you wrote to cover your parents, Joseph funneled it into an investment account. For Caleb, I felt tears prick my eyes. I hadn't lost my life savings. My grandfather had saved it for me, for my son. He knew, I said. He knew Robert would bleed me dry. He bought the debt so Robert couldn't leverage the house, Lincoln said. Technically, Robert hasn't owned that house in 20 years. Joseph did. And now Caleb does. The deed you thought you bought? You bought it from Joseph's trust, moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. The genius of it was staggering. And the love. There's something else, Caleb said. He was holding up a photo. It was a grainy picture of a younger Connor, maybe 14, sitting in a car. A BMW. What's this? I asked. Flip it over, Lincoln said. On the back, in Joseph's handwriting, Connor bullying Caleb. 2022, school parking lot. I kept the video. I remembered that day. Caleb had come home with a torn backpack. He told me he fell. Lincoln, do you have the video? Lincoln tapped a USB drive on the table. Right here. Joseph hired a private investigator a year ago. He wanted to know why Caleb was so sad. Show me. We plugged it into my laptop. The video played. It showed the high school parking lot. Connor was leaning out of the passenger window of Andrew's BMW. He threw a slushie at Caleb, who was walking to the bus. You could hear the audio clearly. Hey, Artard, Connor yelled. Go read a book. Oh wait, you can't. Connor's friends in the car laughed. Caleb just kept walking, head down, wiping the red slushie off his jacket. My blood boiled. I had never wanted to hit a child before, but I wanted to strangle my nephew right then. Joseph saw this, Lincoln said quietly. He confronted Robert about it. He told Robert to discipline Connor. Do you know what your father said? I shook my head, fearing the answer. Robert said, boys will be boys. At least Connor is alpha. Caleb needs to toughen up if he's going to survive being that stupid. He called him stupid, I whispered. That was the day Joseph changed the will, Lincoln confirmed. That was the day he wrote you out of the will, Robert out of the will, and Andrew out of the will. He bypassed everyone to give it to the only person who wasn't cruel. My phone rang. It was the Shady Pines reception desk. Mr. Lawson? A harried voice said. This is the night nurse. Your father is creating a disturbance. What kind of disturbance? He's demanding room service. He threw a tray of meatloaf at his roommate, Mr. Henderson. And he's trying to call the governor. I sighed. Put him on. There was a rustle, and then my father's voice, screeching. Mason, you get down here this instant. This is a violation of human rights. The mattress is lumpy, and Henderson smells like ointment. Dad, stop it, I said. You're at Shady Pines because you have no money. You spent it all. Remember, I have money, Robert yelled. I have the savings, the $350,000. That's a lie, Dad, I shouted into the phone. There is no $350,000. You made it up to impress the funeral guests. There was, Robert insisted, his voice cracking. I borrowed it. I borrowed it from a loan shark. To show people we were still on top. I froze. You did what? I borrowed it, he whimpered. Short term. High interest. I thought Andrew would land that big deal and pay it back. But he didn't. So you're telling me, I said, my voice trembling with rage, that you borrowed nearly $500,000 from criminals, put it in a visible account to brag at a funeral, and now you owe that money? Yes, Robert sobbed. And they want it back by Friday. Mason, you have to help me. They know where I live. No, Dad, I said, cold as ice. They know where you lived. You don't live there anymore. You live at Shady Pines. Good luck explaining that to the loan sharks. I hung up. I looked at Lincoln. Can they come after the trust? Not a chance. Lincoln smiled, a shark-like smile. The trust is bulletproof. But Robert is in very deep water. What do we do? Caleb asked, eyes wide. We go to the mediation, I said. Andrew called for a family meeting tomorrow with his lawyer. He wants to sue for custody of the assets. We're going to go there and we're going to end this. The mediation wasn't in a court. It was in the conference room of Andrew's lawyer, a strip mall attorney named Saul who wore a suit that was too shiny. Andrew sat on one side, looking haggard. He hadn't shaved. Victoria was next to him, wearing oversized sunglasses to hide red eyes. Robert and Catherine were there, too. I had authorized a temporary release from Shady Pines for legal counsel. They looked rough. Robert's suit was wrinkled, and Catherine looked like she hadn't slept in a week. I walked in with Lincoln and Caleb. I wanted him to see this. I wanted him to see the monsters in the light. Let's make this quick, Saul said, tapping a pen. My clients, Robert and Andrew, contend that Mason Lawson has unlawfully seized control of the family estate and committed elder abuse by placing his parents in a substandard facility. We want the house back, Robert said, his voice trembling but arrogant, and access to father's accounts. And the $350,000, Andrew added. We know you hid it, Mason. I placed the blue envelope on the table. First of all, I said, the $350,000 is gone. Dad. Robert shrank in his chair. It was recalled. Recalled? Andrew asked. What does that mean? It means Dad borrowed it from a loan shark to impress people at the funeral, and the shark took it back this morning plus interest, I said. Dad is currently broke and has a bounty on his kneecaps. Victoria gasped. Andrew looked at his father with pure horror. You borrowed from the mob? I did it for the family image, Robert yelled. Moving on, Lincoln said, opening a folder. You want to sue for support? Let's talk about support. Here are the receipts. Lincoln spread them out like a royal flush. Rent payments for the last 10 years, $480,000. Medical bills, $150,000. Country club fees, $120,000. Food, travel, incidental expenses paid by Mason, $450,000. Lincoln looked at them. Total $1.2 million. That is what Mason has contributed to this family. If you sue him, he will countersue for reimbursement. And since he owns your debt, Lincoln slammed the promissory notes on the table. He will win. And he will take everything Andrew has, which, judging by his credit report, is a leased Mercedes and a maxed-out Visa. The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed. But the inheritance, Victoria said, her voice shrill. Joseph's money, the patents, belong to Caleb, I said. Exclusively. That's not fair. Connor burst into the room. He had been waiting in the hall. He looked like a wreck, messy hair, wild eyes. I'm the oldest. I'm the one going to Stanford. That retard can't even read. Caleb stood up. He didn't look down. He looked Connor in the eye. I can read enough to know you're a thief, Caleb said. Excuse me? Victoria stood up. Don't you dare speak to my son like that. Show the video, I told Lincoln. Lincoln turned his laptop around. It wasn't the bullying video this time. It was the footage from Shady Pines. The timestamp was yesterday afternoon, right before Andrew picked them up for this meeting. It showed Connor visiting his grandparents. It showed him hugging Robert. And then, while Robert was crying into a tissue, it showed Connor deftly slipping Robert's gold watch off his wrist and sliding the wallet out of Robert's jacket pocket. Robert stared at the screen. My watch. I thought I lost it in the move. He stole it, I said, just like he stole the Rolex at school, to pay his gambling debts. Connor, Andrew whispered, tell me it's not true. Connor's face crumpled. He didn't deny it. He just started sobbing. I needed the money. The guys said they were going to hurt me. Grandpa said we were rich. He said I'd get $350,000. I was counting on it. So you stole from me? Robert asked, his voice hollow. Your own grandfather? You lied to me. Connor screamed at Robert. You said we were special. You said we were better than them. But we're broke. We're nothing. The truth hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. The Golden family was a fraud. A house of cards built on lies, debt, and arrogance. And it had just collapsed. We're done here, I said, standing up. Andrew, you can take Mom and Dad, or they go back to Shady Pines. It's up to you. I can't take them, Andrew stammered. Victoria, Then Shady Pines it is, I said. And Connor? If you come near Caleb again, I hand that video to the police. Understand? Connor nodded, weeping. This is the moment that changed everything. When I finally took back control of my life. Not with fists, but with the truth. Thank you for being patient with me this far. You guys are amazing. Please like this video and comment 1 below so I know you're with me. It helps more people find this story, and it tells me that my fight for my son matters to you. Your support is the fuel that keeps me going to share the rest of this journey. Leaving that conference room felt like walking out of a collapsing building just before the roof caves in. We walked to the elevator, me, Caleb, and Lincoln. Behind us, the screaming had started. I could hear Victoria shrieking at Andrew. I could hear Robert shouting at Connor. It was the sound of rats fighting on a sinking ship. You did good, kid, Lincoln said to Caleb in the elevator. I didn't do anything, Caleb said, looking at his shoes. You stood up, I said. You looked him in the eye and you told the truth. That's doing something. We went down to the parking lot. My truck was parked next to Andrew's Mercedes. I noticed something I hadn't before. The Mercedes had a boot on the wheel. Looks like the repo man found him, I muttered. We got in the truck. I felt a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in 20 years. But there was still sadness. Those were my parents. That was my brother. What happens to them now? Caleb asked as we drove away. Andrew will abandon them, I predicted. He's selfish. He'll try to save his marriage and his own skin. Mom and Dad, they'll go back to Shady Pines, and they'll have to learn to live like the rest of us. And Connor has a hard road ahead, I said. But maybe this is the wake-up call he needs. I was right about Andrew. 2 hours later, I got a call from the Shady Pines intake nurse. Mr. Lawson, your brother just dropped your parents off at the curb. Literally at the curb. He didn't even come in. Are they okay? I asked, hating that I still cared. They're shaken up. Your father is demanding to speak to you. Tell him. I paused. Tell him I'm busy helping my son with his homework. I'll visit on Sunday. Maybe. I hung up. That night, Caleb and I ordered pizza. the expensive kind with extra cheese and pepperoni. We sat on the living room floor, surrounded by Grandpa Joseph's blueprints. "Dad," Caleb asked, chewing a slice, "can we build this? The engine thing?" I looked at the complex drawing. It was brilliant, and with the trust money we could afford the parts. "Yeah, Bud," I said. "We can build it. We can build whatever you want." My phone buzzed again. A text from Robert. "Mason, please. The food here is inedible. Andrew blocked my number. I'm sorry about the funeral. Bring me home." I stared at the screen. The apology was tagged on at the end, a transactional afterthought. He wasn't sorry he hurt Caleb. He was sorry he was eating meatloaf. I typed back, "You are home, Dad. You have a roof and food. That's more than you provided for yourself. I'll bring you some decent coffee on Sunday. But don't ask to leave. That door is closed." I blocked the number for the night. The next morning I went to the courthouse with Lincoln. We filed for a permanent restraining order against Connor and Andrew on Caleb's behalf, citing the theft and the bullying. As we were leaving, I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench outside. It was Sarah, my cousin, the black sheep of the family who had been ostracized years ago for marrying a mechanic. Ironically, a man just like Grandpa Joseph. "Sarah?" I asked. She looked up. She looked tired but kind. "Hey, Mason. I heard about the funeral. I was there in the back. I saw what you did. I'm sorry about the scene," I said. "Don't be," she smiled. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to punch a hole in Robert's ego. Joseph would have been proud." "Did you know?" I asked. "About the debt? The trust?" "Joseph told me a bit," she said. "He came to see me a few months ago. Gave me this." She handed me a small envelope. He said, "Give this to Mason when the dust settles." I opened it. It was a picture of me and Caleb years ago working on a birdhouse. On the back it said, "The only thing better than a builder is a father who builds his son up. You're a good father, Mason. Don't let them make you doubt that." I choked up. Standing there on the courthouse steps, I finally felt free. "Do you want to come over for dinner?" I asked Sarah. "Caleb is starting a new project. He could use another mechanic's eye." Sarah beamed. "I'd love to." The family I was born into had crumbled. But looking at Sarah, and thinking of Caleb and Lincoln, I realized I was building a new one. A real one. 6 months. That's how long it takes for a life to completely change its texture. 6 months ago, my life felt like polished marble. Cold, hard, and slippery. Now it feels like unfinished oak. Rough in places, sure, but warm, solid, and real. I stood in the doorway of what used to be a cluttered 2-car garage. It didn't look like a garage anymore. The smell of stale oil and exhaust was gone, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of fresh sawdust and soldering iron smoke. Sunlight streamed through the new skylights we had installed, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Above the workbench, a simple wooden sign hung on the wall. Caleb had carved it himself. The Joseph Mitchell Workshop. This was the inheritance. Not the fake savings account, not the leased cars, and certainly not the hollow prestige of the Lawson family name. This was it. We had used the first disbursement from Grandpa Joseph's patent royalties to gut the space and turn it into a maker's paradise. There were 3D printers humming in the corner, a CNC machine, and an entire wall of pristine snap-on tools, the kind my father, Robert, would have bought just to look at but never touch. Caleb was at the center bench. He had grown 2 inches since the funeral. He wasn't wearing an ill-fitting suit today. He was wearing coveralls covered in grease stains, protective goggles pushed up on his forehead, and a grin that could power a small city. He was holding a prototype for a new kind of fuel injector valve. He had been working on it for weeks, decoding Grandpa Joseph's old blueprints and modernizing them. "Dad, check the pressure gauge," Caleb said without looking up. "I think we're holding steady at 40 psi. I walked over and tapped the dial. "Solid as a rock, Bud. You did it." "We did it," he corrected me. That "we" meant everything. Life outside the garage had moved on, but in a much uglier direction for the rest of the family. The fallout from the mediation had been nuclear. Let's start with my parents. Shady Pines wasn't a temporary punishment anymore. It was their reality. I visited them once a month. I brought them decent coffee and toiletries, soft toilet paper, good shampoo, the small luxuries they used to take for granted. Robert was a shadow of himself. The bluster was gone. Without an audience to impress, his ego had starved to death. He spent his days sitting by the window, watching cars go by, muttering about how he used to be a captain of industry. The staff told me he was docile now, mostly because he had no other choice. Catherine, my mother, was different. She was angry, bitter. She refused to speak to me during my visits, turning her wheelchair away to face the wall. She blamed me for the humiliation, never once acknowledging that it was her own husband's lies that put them there. Then there was Andrew, my brother, the success story. His fall was the hardest to watch, even if he deserved it. The divorce came fast and brutal. Victoria didn't just leave him. She scorched the earth. When she found out the golden child inheritance was a myth and that Andrew was drowning in debt, she filed for divorce within 48 hours. She took the furniture, the jewelry, whatever hadn't been pawned, and moved back in with her parents in Connecticut. Andrew was living in a studio apartment above a laundromat on the east side. He was driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic because the repo men had finally caught up with the Mercedes. He was working sales at a mid-tier insurance firm, making a base salary that barely covered his alimony. And then there was Connor. I hadn't seen my nephew since the mediation room where he admitted to stealing the watch. I had heard rumors from Sarah, my cousin. She told me Connor had dropped out of his private school before they could expel him. He was living with Andrew, sleeping on a pull-out couch. I was tightening a bolt on the workbench when I heard a hesitant knock on the garage door frame. I turned around. At first, I didn't recognize him. The boy standing there was thin, gaunt even. The expensive haircut was gone, replaced by a shaggy, overgrown mess. He was wearing a faded hoodie and jeans that had holes in the knees, not the fashionable kind, but the wear-and-tear kind. It was Connor. Caleb looked up from his work. He froze. I saw his hand instinctively reach for a wrench, a defensive reflex that broke my heart. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low. I stepped between him and Caleb. Connor didn't step forward. He kept his hands visible, like he was surrendering. "Uncle Mason," he said. His voice cracked. I walked here. "That's 5 miles, I said. "Why?" "Dad's working," Connor said, looking at the floor. "And Mom blocked my number." That hit me. Victoria had blocked her own son? "What do you want, Connor?" I asked, crossing my arms. "If you're looking for money, you know the answer." "I don't want money," Connor said quickly. He looked up and I saw his eyes. They were red-rimmed. I need a job." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "A job? You?" "I'm serious," he said. "Nobody will hire me. The theft, it's on my record. The juvenile court gave me community service and probation, but I need to pay back the $50,000. The bookies found Dad. They smashed his windshield last week." "That's not my problem, Connor," I said coldly. "And frankly, I don't trust you within 10 feet of this equipment. Or my son." Connor flinched. He looked at Caleb, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "I know," Connor whispered. "I know I was a monster. I know I treated you like garbage, Caleb. I'm sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I don't have anywhere else to go." "Go to your mother," I said. "She said I'm a reminder of her failure of a marriage," Connor said, tears spilling over. "She doesn't want me." The silence in the garage was heavy. The hum of the 3D printer seemed deafening. I looked at this kid, 16 years old, used as a prop by his grandparents, spoiled into rottenness by his parents, and now discarded by everyone because he was no longer shiny. He was the golden grandchild turned into lead. "Dad," Caleb said softly. I turned to my son. "Caleb, you don't have to do this. We can tell him to leave." Caleb put down the wrench. He walked around the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped 3 feet from Connor. You called me a charity case, Caleb said. I know, Connor wept. You stole from Grandpa. I know. Why should we help you? Caleb asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Connor wiped his nose on his sleeve. Because I'm hungry, Caleb. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Caleb looked at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was angry, yes, but he was also Joseph's great-grandson. He had a heart that the rest of the Lawsons didn't deserve. We have extra sandwiches, Caleb said. In the mini-fridge. Connor looked like he might collapse with relief. You can eat, I told Connor. And then you leave. Connor nodded frantically. Thank you. Thank you. He ate the sandwich like a starving animal. It was uncomfortable to watch. When he was done, he folded the wrapper neatly. I can sweep, Connor offered, looking at the sawdust-covered floor. I can take out the trash. I can clean the oil stains. Please, Uncle Mason. I'll work for minimum wage. I'll work for less. I just need to do something real. I'm tired of lying. I looked at Caleb. It was his workshop. It was his call. Caleb looked at the broom in the corner. Then he looked at his cousin. You don't touch the tools, Caleb said sternly. You sweep. You scrub. You organize the scrap metal. If you steal so much as a washer, my dad calls the police. Deal? Connor nodded so hard I thought his head would fall off. Deal. I promise. And one more thing, Caleb added. You stop calling me names. You stop acting like you're better than us. Because right now, you're the one asking for help. I know, Connor whispered. I'm the charity case now. It was a cruel irony, but it was the truth. So Connor started working. The first few weeks were tense. I watched him like a hawk. I installed security cameras and checked his pockets before he left every day. But Connor didn't steal. He swept until the concrete floor shone. He scrubbed the grease stains until his knuckles were raw. He didn't complain. He didn't brag. He just worked. One afternoon, about a month after Connor started, I walked in to find the boys huddled over an old motorcycle engine we had pulled from a junkyard. No, you're tightening it too much, Caleb was saying. It's aluminum. You'll strip the threads. You have to feel it. Connor was holding the torque wrench. He looked terrified of breaking it. Like this. Gently, Caleb guided his hand. There. Feel that click? That's it. Connor looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek, his eyes wide with wonder. I fixed it. You didn't break it, Caleb grinned. Which is a start. I stood back watching them. The golden child and the failure. One learning to be humble, the other learning to lead. It wasn't perfect. Andrew tried to come by once to borrow some of Connor's wages, but I chased him off with a threat to call his parole officer. He had gotten into some trouble with a DUI shortly after the divorce. Robert called from the nursing home demanding we bring Connor to visit, but Connor refused to go. He just wants to tell me how disappointed he is, Connor told me one day while we were organizing bolts. He wants to tell me I ruined the legacy. But Uncle Mason, yeah, I think the legacy was fake. The whole time, Grandpa Robert didn't build anything. He just spent money. You're learning, I said. Caleb is building things, Connor said, looking at his cousin across the room. That's the real legacy, isn't it? Making something work. It is, I said. Joseph would have liked you like this, Connor. Dirty hands and all. Connor smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in years. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't arrogant. It was just a kid happy that he had done a good job. That evening, I sat on the porch with Sarah. She had become a regular fixture at our Sunday dinners. You're a better man than I am, Mason, she said, watching the boys play basketball in the driveway, taking in the kid who bullied your son. I didn't do it for Connor, I admitted. I did it for Caleb. He needed to see that he has the power now. He needed to be the one to offer mercy. It makes him stronger. And Connor is deprogramming, I said. He's realizing that his value isn't attached to a Rolex or a Porsche. It's hard work. But he's getting there. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. The monthly disbursement from the patent trust had arrived. It was enough to cover our bills, the workshop expenses, and put a chunk into Caleb's real college fund. Not the fake one Robert had lied about. I looked at the notification, then at the boys. We were okay. For the first time in my life, we were actually truly okay. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Caleb called me over to the far corner of the workshop. He had cleared a space on the workbench and placed something there, covered by a cloth. "I finished it," he said. His voice was hushed, reverent. "Finished what?" He pulled the cloth away. Sitting there was an old Zenith transoceanic radio from the 1950s. It was Grandpa Joseph's. It had been sitting in his attic, broken and silent, for 20 years. Robert had tried to throw it out a dozen times, calling it junk. But I had saved it. Caleb had taken it apart completely. He had sourced vintage vacuum tubes online, resoldered the connections, and polished the chrome until it gleamed. "Does it work?" I asked. "Only one way to find out," Caleb said. He plugged it in. The tubes began to glow with a warm, orange light. A low hum filled the air, the sound of electricity waking up after a long sleep. Caleb turned the dial. Static. More static. And then, cutting through the noise like a lighthouse beam, came the sound of a jazz station. The clarity was startling. "It's beautiful, Caleb," I said. "Wait," he said. "There's more." He pressed a button on the side. I hadn't noticed it before. It looked like a modification Caleb had added. The music cut out. A voice replaced it. A voice I hadn't heard in 6 months, but knew as well as my own. "Testing, testing. Is this thing on? Mason? If you're hearing this, it means the boy fixed the radio." I knew he could. I grabbed the edge of the workbench. It was Grandpa Joseph. "I recorded this on the internal tape deck years ago." Joseph's voice crackled, warm and gravelly. "I wanted to leave a message for the ones who care enough to fix things." Connor walked over, holding a broom. He stopped, listening. Robert breaks things," Joseph said. "He breaks promises. He breaks people. He thinks the world owes him a living. But you, Mason, and that boy of yours, you build. You mend." I felt tears streaming down my face. "I've watched you, Mason, paying your parents' bills, keeping the peace. You think it's weakness. It's not. It's strength. But there comes a time when you have to stop patching up a sinking ship and build a lifeboat. I hope you did that. I hope you saved yourself. And to the boy, to Caleb, I know they call you names. I know school is hard. But listen to me. The world is full of people who can read a spreadsheet but can't change a tire. They are useless when the storm comes. You have the touch. You have the gift. Never let them make you feel small. You are the giant in that family." The recording clicked off. The jazz music returned. Silence filled the workshop, heavier and sweeter than the music. Connor was crying. He leaned on his broom, wiping his eyes with his dirty sleeve. "He knew," Connor whispered. "He knew everything." "He did," I said. I looked at my son. He wasn't crying. He was glowing. He stood tall, his hand resting on the radio he had brought back to life. He looked like a king in his castle of tools. That moment was the final seal on our victory. The validation didn't come from a bank account or a funeral speech. It came from the past, from the man who started it all, confirming what we knew in our hearts. Later that evening, I sat alone in my living room. The house was quiet. Caleb was asleep. I thought about my parents at Shady Pines. I thought about the anger I had carried for so long, the resentment of being the charity case in my own family, the one who was used and discarded. But as I sat there, I realized something strange. The anger was gone. It hadn't disappeared because I got revenge. Putting them in the nursing home was justice, sure, but it wasn't what healed me. What healed me was seeing Caleb thrive. What healed me was seeing Connor sweep a floor and say, "Thank you." What healed me was the realization that I was the one who broke the cycle. I didn't hate Robert and Catherine anymore. Pitted them. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, a prison of ego and expectation. They would die lonely because they chose pride over love. I picked up my phone. I navigated to the contact for Dad. I unblocked it. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just looked at it. I realized that unblocking him didn't mean letting him back in. It just meant I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He was just a contact in a phone. A man who used to have power over me, but now had none. I went to check on Caleb. He was sleeping soundly, the blueprints for his next project scattered on his desk. I kissed his forehead. "You're the winner, kid," I whispered. "You won the game they didn't even know you were playing." The next day was a Saturday. The Joseph Mitchell workshop was officially open for business. We weren't just fixing our own stuff anymore. Caleb had started taking repair jobs from the neighborhood. Toasters, lawnmowers, old lamps. He charged fair prices and he did impeccable work. Car pulled up. It wasn't a luxury car. It was a minivan. A woman got out, looking frazzled, dragging a broken stroller. "I heard you guys work miracles," she said. "The wheels snapped off, and I can't afford a new one." Caleb stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. "Let me take a look, ma'am." Connor stepped up beside him. "I'll grab the welding kit, Caleb?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "And the heavy-duty washers." I watched them work. 2 cousins. One the former bully, one the victim. Now just a team. That's when it hit me. The definition of legacy. Robert thought legacy was a name on a building or a balance in a bank account. He thought it was about blood purity and status. But legacy is this. It's the skills you pass down. It's the kindness you show when no one is watching. It's the ability to take something broken and make it whole again. My parents wanted a golden grandchild. They wanted a trophy. They didn't realize that gold is heavy, cold, and useless for anything other than looking at. I'll take the iron and the steel. I'll take the grease and the grit, because that's what builds the world. As the sun set over the workshop, casting long shadows across the driveway, I felt a profound sense of peace. The war was over. The toxic branches had been pruned, and what remained was strong, healthy, and growing. I looked at the camera, or rather, I looked at you, the people who have been listening to this story. You might be wondering if I ever regret it. If I regret signing those papers at the funeral home. If I regret cutting off my parents. The answer is no. Not for a second. Because by cutting them off, I saved my son. And in saving my son, I saved myself. We are not charity cases. We are the architects of our own lives. And we just finished building our masterpiece. So what can we learn from the Lawson family wreckage? First, financial literacy is your shield. My parents used money as a weapon, but they didn't actually understand it. They confused lifestyle with wealth. True wealth isn't a leased luxury car or a country club membership you can't afford. True wealth is assets. It's living below your means, and it's having the freedom to say no. Grandpa Joseph understood this. He built real wealth through ownership, patents, debt buying, while living simply. Because I understood the numbers, I was able to see through my father's lies. If you don't control your money or the people who have it will control you. Second, toxic family is not a life sentence. We are taught that blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, blood is just a biological accident. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm, even if those others gave birth to you. My parents' love was conditional on my obedience and my son's perfection. That's not love. That's a transaction. Setting boundaries wasn't an act of hate. It was an act of self-preservation. Lastly, your value is internal. Caleb was called a failure because he couldn't read well in a traditional school setting. But his value lay in his mechanical genius and his empathy. If we judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. Don't let someone else's definition of success define your worth. I want to hear from you guys. What is the one thing you've had to fix in your own life? Whether it was a relationship, a financial mess, or your own self-esteem that made you stronger. Drop a comment with your story, or just type good if you think Caleb is the real MVP of this story. Your comments help me know these stories are landing. Thanks for watching, and remember, build what matters. Ignore the noise, and never, ever let them call you a failure. See you in the next one.